I'm Venus with Galaxy Inc. And for this week's writing tips, we're going to be talking about children's books and tough conversations. One of my favorite authors is Charles Dickens. And the reason why I like Charles Dickens is not necessarily because I think all of his books are fantastic, although they're obviously classics, but because they created a social change in a way that books hadn't up until that point. And I don't know if they have since. So basically, Oliver Twist, when it was written about an orphan child, the public opinion of workhouses was actually fairly positive. People didn't hate it. That's where they thought people should go. If they were poor, they didn't really know about the inner workings of it. But there was definitely a social justice movement of people who did know, and they were learning about it, and they wanted the world to know. And one of those people was Charles Dickens. And so he wrote this story of a young orphan that people could love and relate to, and that character being Oliver Twist. And people really embraced that character to the point where the average layman was on the streets going, is a workhouse really a good thing? It seems really bad. Like, if this is how kids are being treated, if this is how people are being treated, this isn't good. We need to do something about this. The same thing happened when Dickens wrote Nicholas Nickleby, where there were Yorkshire schools where their parents were promised that their children would be learning about these wonderful things about the world, and if they just paid this much money, £1 or £10 a year, their kid could go and get an education, which for somebody who was poor was considered, a huge opportunity. But what was really happening was the kids were being, shilled out to farms where they were forced to work. Any money that was being sent was just being used, pocketed by the people who own the schools, and the children were being treated pretty horribly and dying in these schools. And Dickens knew about this, and he wrote a book about it. And his book actually changed, fictional book. Within 10 years of him writing that book, and because of that book, the Yorkshire schools were closed. There was not a single one open within a decade after that. And that is a really big deal, and that's a huge social change. I think that kind of thing, those important topics, need to also be discussed in children's books. I don't think that we should shy away from them. I know that there's a school of thought for some parents who don't want to destroy their children's innocence, and they want their children to remain as innocent and carefree for as long as possible. So we don't want to introduce, these kind of heavy topics to those children. But I also know that there are children who are living these heavy topics, and they are living in these worlds, and they need characters that they can relate to. I've mentioned this before in several of my videos, but the children should be able to have characters that they can relate to, and it's okay to introduce heavy topics, especially in middle grade, but in young adulthood especially, but middle grade too. It's okay to talk about these things and introduce kids so that they can form empathy for other people who are going through things that maybe they'll never go through, but maybe they will, and it'll prepare them. Or maybe it'll just give them empathy for a friend who's also dealing with a similar issue or topic. I don't want to call it a topic, it's an issue when it's real people. So the first one that I want to talk about is because the book itself hit home for me, is that I think that it's okay to have unhappy endings or unresolved endings. So Jacqueline Woodson wrote a book called Each Kindness, and it's about a kid who is lower income, who gets made fun of a lot, and is treated pretty badly. And not to give away the ending, but I'm going to give away the ending, so fast forward if you don't want to hear the ending of this book. But it is unresolved, and the main character is never able to ask for forgiveness because that character, the girl who is being made fun of, moved away. And this happened to me. It's the one and only time I've ever bullied anybody in my life. In 3rd grade, I treated a girl pretty badly because everybody else was. And she ended up leaving the school because of it. And I felt horrible. And the teacher made sure that we knew that we were the reason why she left. And it really hit home with me. But I was never able to apologize to her. The only way that I could make it up was to never do it again. And to never be that person, because I didn't like that feeling of who I was. So I think it's okay to have books in which things are unresolved. A character's not able to apologize, or somebody passes away and they're not able to finalize things with that person, and that's okay, because that's life. Our lives don't stop at the end of a page. Our lives keep going. Characters who maybe they go to therapy and they're going to keep going to therapy. We know this. When the book ends, this character is not going to be completely 100% okay. They've solved this problem, but they've still got issues. And I think that's okay to have that kind of open-endedness in a book. So another hard-hitting topic that I think that I like to see books about, and I think it's important, is books about cults and dangerous religion in general. And obviously, I am not saying that anyone's particular religion is dangerous. I am saying, though, that I don't think parents want their kids to be sucked in by cults. I also think cults are really important to address. One, because there are children who, they are in cults, and they have access to books, and they need to be able to see themselves within them. They also need to see that there is a way out, or that they don't have to live their life this way, that there is a way to live in a different way. In My Life with the Liars, I've mentioned it before, I think it's a fantastic book of a character from the perspective of a character who's been caught up and raised in a cult, and to see how she struggles with really kind of becoming a part of the normal world. I think it's a great topic, and I don't see it very often, but I'd love to see more of it. One book that I know that people really struggle with dealing with and talking about is alcoholism and drug addiction, or just addiction in general. There are kids who this is their daily reality, and writing stories in which the parents or somebody in their periphery, an aunt, an uncle, a grandma, a grandpa, possibly everybody in their lives is involved in some kind of addiction. I think it's okay to write stories about this and address it and talk about it and recognize the damage that it's doing to children, and tell a child, I see you. I see what you're struggling with, and I see what you're going through, and it's okay. I think of the story Rain, where the main character is on the spectrum. She has some ADHD issues. She's a little obsessive about homonyms, and her father is having a really hard time being a single dad, and he spends most of his nights at the bar, and the main character is really having a hard time with that within all of her other issues that she's dealing with. And I think that it's important to say to kids that we see them. We know that you struggle with these. We know that you have a parent or a guardian who is maybe not able to take care of you in the way that they should. And I think for some of those kids, I've read numerous interviews with people who talk about how reading books and seeing characters like themselves helped them, and it helped them realize that they were going to be okay, and it helped them realize that there are other people that are not like this, or that this doesn't have to be their normal. And I think it's okay for us to create books for them, even if it feels like they're the minority. A topic that I think most kids will have to deal with at some point is death and dying. It's a tough topic to deal with, and I know that it's not one that we all want to write about. And some of us, the authors and the editors, have a hard time with those subjects already as adults, and so dealing with that within a children's book. But kids are going to lose pets, and kids are going to lose grandparents, and or great grandparents sometimes, and they're going to have to kind of wrestle with these topics. And it's not about losing innocence, it's about just we're raising adults, and they're going to become adults, and we have to give them healthy ways to deal with death. And I think there's some really great books to deal with it. The Unicorn in the Barn by Jacqueline Ogburn is a fantastic example of kind of touching on those subjects with it still feeling light. It's not feeling like super heavy all the time, but it does touch on the topic, and so you can kind of embrace it in a way, I guess, and embrace the kind of the idea of death within animals. I think another example is Mockingbird by Catherine Erskine. Also a good example of kind of death happening. The main character's brother is killed in a school shooting, and this is the aftermath of that, dealing with those feelings, you know. It's a pretty heavy book, and it's not super serious. I know a lot of people know A Bridge to Terabithia, also dealing with death, and that being some people's first introduction to this idea that children die. And I think it's an important book. I think that there's a reason why it's a classic too. And it doesn't have to happen in the book. It could have happened in the past. And we could be even future casting. So a good book that does kind of future casting, and we're going to move right into the next one, which is illness or cancer, is The Honest Truth by Dan Guyman-Hart, where the character is diagnosed with cancer. He is dying, and he decides he's going to die on his own terms, and he's going to climb a mountain just like him and his grandfather did, and he's going to die on top of that mountain, and that's what's going to happen. And he doesn't care if there's a snowstorm moving in. Oh well, you know. It is a fascinating book, and a great way of looking at illness and the character doesn't, I mean, I'll tell you now, the character doesn't die in the book, but we know he's going to. And that's okay if it happens kind of later too. You know, just kind of setting up this character and us getting to know them and understanding that happens. You know, kids get sick. And that's a tough topic, but again, builds empathy. And moving on to a different topic, and I consider this very different, disabilities. So illness and cancer are one thing. I feel like a disability is its own separate thing, because you can be disabled and not be sick and not be dying, you know, so we need to make sure that those things are separate. Disability, I think, absolutely needs to be addressed. That to me is a diversity issue. We've got people in our world and in our lives, and schools are matriculated now where, you know, we don't have kids with learning disabilities and severe intellectual disabilities at different schools. They go to school with your kids. And so we need to show books where those characters exist, you know, and they're in their periphery. I have Googled this, by the way. I looked up how many books have disabled characters or characters with special needs, and it is such a tiny percentage. It's like 1% of books. It is crazy. But 27% of our population, at least the last time I looked, have some kind of disability. And some of those happen with old age, but some of them are just what people are born with. So we are not conveying that within our books. Also, Googled this one day because I read a book called Mosquito Land, and one of the characters in the book has Down syndrome. I had never read a book with a character who had Down syndrome in it. So I started looking, okay, you know, fictional book, not these little books that are teaching kids about what it is. Actual fictional book with just a character in it that has Down syndrome. I found one more. So there are 2 books with young adult or middle grade that have a kid with Down syndrome. And that's crazy to me. Like, why aren't there more? Also, I will say, and we'll talk, I'll probably do an entire episode on just disabilities in children's literature, because that is what I did my thesis on. So I'm going to talk about violence. We have children and young adults who are living in worlds where they don't feel safe all the time. And that could be because of where they live. It could be who they live with. It could be just what they hear around school, or, you know, the whatever. But that's an issue. And it, you know, it's one of, I think, this constantly being talked about, and kids see it on the news. And so there is this idea, I don't want to call it an idea, there is there is this need to address the fact that kids don't always feel safe and that violence happens. Violence, whether it's abuse, violence, whether it's gun violence or gang violence or violence that happens just because of drama. You as the author have an opportunity to address those moments and to really allow readers into those worlds. Jason Reynolds does a great job with Ghost in creating a character who is running, and he runs a lot, but he runs because that is what kept him safe, running. And so running has become something that maybe he can use. He can join the track team, but he doesn't see it at first. In his mind, running is what kept me alive, and that's what's keeping me alive now. It is a fight, flight, or fright response, and he is in flight, and he doesn't know how to stop running. And so we've created this, Reynolds has created this fantastic character, and now a series of characters who all use running for different reasons. But we start with the first one, which is violence, and a character and his mother who ran for their lives and managed to escape, but that didn't stop running because of fear and because that flight response has been triggered and activated. I think it's important to have those moments. I don't see that kind of thing addressed in middle grade. I see it more in young adult. Don't see it as much in middle grade. I think Reynolds does a great job of walking that line, of introducing that concept without it becoming, too heavy or scary, and allowing readers to have some empathy for that main character. I think another character that does it is The Stars Beneath Our Feet by Barclay. His name's not David Barclay Moore. And that one also kind of addresses a different type of violence with gun violence and stuff. So, there's these great books. I can't even remember the one I read that had to do with abuse and the characters having to leave. If I think of it, I'll have it pop up here. But if I don't, then I forgot. I read a lot of books, if you haven't been able to tell, and I can't remember them all. They don't all stick in my head. I think another one that needs to be addressed, and I do not think anybody should shy away from this, and I think parents definitely should not hide this from their children, is extreme poverty and the poverty that happens. One, we have a lot of children in our country and in the world who live in extreme poverty, and I think that is an important area to address. A surprising picture book that covered this was Maddie's Fridge by Lois Brandt. And in Maddie's fridge, her friend notices that there's nothing in there, and it's because they don't have the money to put food in there. And then Maddie's, her friend starts trying to help find ways to give Maddie food for her fridge without Maddie feeling like she's getting a handout. And I was shocked that this book existed. I have never seen a picture book that addresses extreme poverty and also addressed wanting to help without dehumanizing someone or making them feel less than. And I was like, whoa, there's a book like this and it exists. It's fantastic. There's another book called How to Steal a Dog by Barbara O'Connor. And in that book, the characters are living in a car. They've been kicked out of their apartment. They're living in a car. And there's a reward for a dog that's $500. And the girl thinks, if I could find that dog, I could help my mom out. That's a lot of weight to have on a kid, but I think that it's a really important one, and I want to remind you that kids in any of the circumstances that I mentioned earlier, they have access to a library, so they can read these books and they can get their hands on them, and librarians can give kids these books, and they have access to their school libraries. Sometimes the librarians are aware of their situation. These books can get into the hands of readers who need them. And I think the most important thing that we can add into our books are characters who understand and characters who can be a support for the people who are going through those situations. Having whether it's another parent who's able to help, whether the character's going to therapy, or if a character has a best friend that they can talk to, having that constant having a person that can help lead them through and help them kind of see through the struggle that they're currently going through, because we don't walk in this world alone, and we need to have characters that portray that as well. I know that some of these topics are really heavy, and the idea of your 8 or 9-year-old reading a book about abuse when they've never been abused might come as a bit of a shock for a parent. But I think that it's important that kids are introduced to some of these topics in an age-appropriate way. That's the important part here. If you're writing a picture book, it needs to be age-appropriate, and it needs to deal with these topics in an age-appropriate way. And if you're writing a middle grade, if you're writing young adult, you have to deal with these topics in a way that a kid is going to be able to relate to. And it's not going to be so heavy that it gives them nightmares. We don't want to do that, but we want to create a safe space within books. We want to create characters that kids can relate to, and we want to create children who can empathize with people who have different experiences than them. Don't forget to press like and subscribe to my channel. We post new writing tips for every type of writer almost every Friday. I've been Venus with Galaxy Inc. I hope your writing is out of this world. I don't want our children to be sucked in by a cult. And oh my God. So that's what my cat sounds like when she's getting high. Oh my God. Domino! Domino, please stop. I can't keep recording. She's gonna do that.